When I bought my secluded farm, I never imagined the HOA president next door would launch a war to seize control of my land. From trespassers to forged petitions, hidden cameras exposed her lies, but the final showdown left her humiliated, fined, and running from the law. This is how I outsmarted a power-hungry HOA tyrant, saved my private property, and exposed the shocking truth she tried to bury. Let's just say, Karen picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. I first realized something was off one afternoon when I spotted two strangers traipsing across my field. I'd been working along the tree line, clearing debris, when I heard voices. For a second, I wondered if it was someone I knew, maybe a neighbor wanting to say hello. But as I got closer, it became obvious these people had no reason to be on my property. They were walking like they owned the place, pointing at the crops, admiring the view, and chatting as though they'd booked some guided tour. Was it stressful? Absolutely. But letting a manipulative bully waltz in and claim your property is far worse. Stay vigilant. Karens are everywhere. Smash that like button if you've ever fought a power-tripping HOA. Comment your worst Karen story below. And subscribe because trust me, she's not done. The next video? Let's just say those mysterious tire tracks came back. Karen picked the wrong neighbor to mess with, and I'll never let anyone pull a stunt like that on my land again. If she resurfaces, and I wouldn't put it past her, I'll be ready. After all, this farm is mine. No HOA scheme is ever going to change that. When I mentioned strangers on my land, her expression morphed into feigned innocence. "Oh, that must have been a misunderstanding," she said. "I might have spoken about your property in passing, but I never told anyone to go inside." I didn't buy a word, but she stuck to her story. When I pressed her on why she cared about my farm, she just said, "We're always happy to have new neighbors, especially ones who might consider joining the HOA." Then she gave me a knowing look, as if daring me to argue. I left feeling uneasy, but with no concrete proof of her wrongdoing, there wasn't much I could do. Still, I stepped up my security. I installed more cameras, put in motion-detecting lights, and made sure the gate was secured every night. For a couple of months there were no new incidents, just the occasional glimpse of Karen's car idling near the property line. Then, without warning, I started finding weird things around the farm. First, there was a random pile of trash, cans, wrappers, even a pair of shoes, just inside the tree line. Even the HOA board members testified that her actions were unauthorized. The council saw right through her lies, unanimously voting to deny the annexation request. In an additional blow, they launched an inquiry into Karen's misuse of HOA funds. Now everything was unraveling for her. The HOA board found $12,000 missing from their accounts. Karen's landscaping budget? A front. When they threatened legal action, she vanished, but not before one last petty revenge. Oh, you thought this story had a happy ending? After the council hearing, I expected I'd seen the last of her. But that following week, I discovered a mysterious gash in one of my wooden fence posts, as though someone had taken a hatchet to it. It wasn't enough to compromise the fence, but it sent a clear message. She was still out there, still holding a grudge. The sheriff's department couldn't prove it was her, though everyone knew exactly whose handiwork it was. Apparently, Karen was in no hurry to face a judge if the HOA pressed charges regarding their missing funds. Karen provided documentation suggesting it had been annexed, or was in the process of being annexed. My heart pounded. Annexed? That's not something an HOA can do without city approval, and certainly not without my consent. Fueled by anger, I called a friend who worked in local government, specifically in zoning and land use. Within hours, she sent me a file. Apparently, Karen had submitted a request to the city council months ago to annex my farm, labeling it unmaintained and claiming it would be beneficial to the community if it were brought under HOA rules. She'd attached photos taken without my permission and bogus complaints from neighbors who said my property was an eyesore. It was a tapestry of lies, but if she convinced the council, I'd be forced into the HOA, subject to their endless rules and fees. To make matters worse, the council was set to review her request in 2 weeks. I needed to act, and fast. Karen's entire plan hinged on secrecy, on no one challenging her until it was too late. This was my private property, not a park for the HOA to commandeer. But the boldness of it all made me wonder what Karen had been telling these people. Clearly, she'd spun a story that my land was basically up for grabs. I marched straight to Karen's house, petition in hand. She answered the door looking downright smug. "Oh, that?" she said, when I waved the petition in front of her face. "It's just encouragement. We'd love to have your lovely property as part of our community." Nothing personal, she shrugged, brushing me off as if we were discussing a minor favor, like borrowing sugar. I demanded she stop lying to people. Her mask slipped for a second, revealing a flash of anger. Then the sweetness returned to her voice. "I'm just trying to be a good neighbor," she said. "But if you want to be difficult, I suppose we'll see what happens." That threatening note in her tone made my stomach tighten. A bigger question loomed. Why was she so fixated on acquiring my farm for the HOA? I hired a surveyor to confirm my boundary lines, which came back exactly as I expected. My fence was on my land, and as a bonus. The survey revealed that a row of HOA planted bushes and a decorative sign actually extended onto my property. With these results in hand, I also contacted a real estate attorney. We drafted a pointed response to the HOA, demanding they back off and remove their landscaping from my land. Around that time, I caught Karen on camera again, this time late at night, accompanied by 2 other individuals. One held a measuring tape, the other clutched what looked like blueprints. They were standing near my gate, pointing, gesturing, taking notes. It sent a cold chill through me. Clearly, she was planning the next phase of her power grab. When I phoned the HOA's attorney, the same person who'd signed that letter accusing me of violating their rules, he sounded defensive and a bit embarrassed. "We were under the impression your property fell under HOA jurisdiction," he said. So I decided to shine a very bright light on her machinations. I compiled everything. Screenshots from my security cameras showing Karen trespassing, the surveyor's report disproving her claims, the petition, the letter from the HOA attorney, and a detailed timeline of every shady incident. Then I posted it all online, tagging local neighborhood groups, city council members, and the HOA's own social media. I titled it "The HOA President Who Tried to Steal My Farm," and it blew up. People were shocked, neighbors were furious. It seemed Karen hadn't told anyone on the HOA board about her secret annexation plan. She'd convinced them I was just some troublesome recluse who wouldn't maintain my property, using HOA funds for legal fees and that decorative landscaping near my fence. The board members scrambled to distance themselves from her. One of them, a guy named Dave, even reached out to me personally. He said, "I had no idea she was using our budget to pay for private lawyers and those plants on your land." I found part of the answer soon after. One of the neighbors, a kind woman who'd been guilted into signing the petition, confided to me that Karen had done something similar before. There were rumors she'd successfully annexed 3 other borderline properties by bullying owners into submission, either with endless citations or threats of legal trouble. She was a shark, prowling for land that the HOA could absorb, driving up property values, and her own influence. I was more determined than ever to stand my ground. Then another letter arrived, this one on official HOA letterhead, citing me for violation of community standards and claiming my fence encroached on HOA land. This was nonsense. My fence was well within my property lines, but the letter threatened further action if I didn't remove it. By now I'd pieced together that Karen was behind every bit of this, orchestrating a smear campaign to force me under her control. Why on earth would I need her resources? This was my farm, outside her domain, free from the rules and restrictions those poor subdivision residents had to follow. For a while I just wrote off Karen's behavior as small-town meddling. Then came the Trespassers. Suddenly, I wasn't so sure. Clearly, Karen was telling people my land was part of the neighborhood. That same evening, I checked the footage on my security camera near the gate, and sure enough, there she was, standing on the other side, clipboard in hand, taking photos and notes. Every so often, she'd glance up, scanning the area as though she didn't want to be caught. If my property wasn't under her HOA, why was she so interested in documenting every detail? I decided I needed to confront her. The next day, I headed to the HOA office in the subdivision. It was a neat little building with pastel walls and motivational posters about community. Karen was behind the front desk, still wearing that saccharine smile. She'd resigned as president, vanished from the subdivision, and left a mess for the HOA board to sort out. The good news? My land was safe. No more forged petitions, no more trespassers strolling through like they owned the place, and no more late-night sabotage. At least none that I've caught on camera since. My farm has finally become the peaceful retreat I dreamed of when I first bought it. The board quietly removed the bushes and decorative sign that had intruded on my side of the property line. There's no more talk of annexation, no more letters accusing me of violating community standards. In fact, a few neighbors even apologized for believing Karen's lies, and we've become friendly enough that I'll trade fresh produce for help with repairs now and then. Still, I learned a hard lesson: vigilance is key. If you think someone's overstepping boundaries, document everything. Cameras saved me more than once, and sharing the truth publicly forced Karen to face the consequences. No sign of how it got there, and my cameras inexplicably showed nothing. A few days later, I discovered tire tracks by the back fence. Someone had driven up close, but again, no footage. It felt like a slow, methodical campaign to unnerve me. Then came the final insult. A row of my tomato plants was crushed underfoot, trampled by what looked like human footprints. My frustration boiled over. I'd moved out here to escape chaos, and it was clear I was being targeted. One morning, I found a letter stuffed under my door. It was a petition, complete with signatures from half the subdivision, respectfully requesting that I open my land for limited community access. The language was laughably formal, insisting that my fields were beneficial to the neighborhood, and that letting people stroll around would align with the aesthetic and recreational goals of the community. At the bottom was Karen's signature in bold, followed by a list of names. It was infuriating. She told us you were a nuisance who refused to cooperate. Suddenly, Karen was under fire from both sides. The board demanded explanations. The city council received a flood of calls and emails condemning her annexation request, and my neighbors were livid they'd been misled into signing that petition. But Karen didn't go down without a fight. One night, my cameras caught her sneaking onto my property again, this time with bolt cutters in hand. She tried to remove my no trespassing signs. I called the sheriff immediately. When they arrived, she put on a show, claiming she was just inspecting the property lines. The deputies watched the footage and wrote her a citation for trespassing. Her furious expression as they marched her off was both terrifying and a little satisfying. When the city council finally held the hearing, my attorney and I showed up armed with all our evidence. Several neighbors spoke on my behalf, detailing how Karen had manipulated them. When I bought it, the property had been neglected for a while. The gate was old and rusted. The fences needed work and the fields were overgrown. It was exactly what I wanted, a project I could pour my heart into, a retreat that offered real privacy. On move-in day, I'd barely gotten my last box off the truck before Karen appeared. She introduced herself with a sugary, sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the self-appointed queen of a nearby subdivision, complete with rows of cookie-cutter houses and a shiny HOA office. I remember her first words to me: "We like to keep the neighborhood looking nice, so we hope you'll be a good neighbor." At the time, I played along politely, figuring this was just a nosy busybody with too much time on her hands. When she asked if my property fell under HOA jurisdiction, I explained it didn't. I had specifically chosen this parcel because it was outside their boundaries. She laughed in a strange, forced way and said, "Oh, of course not, but you know, it's always good to be a good neighbor." I shrugged it off as typical small talk, but that phrase would keep coming back like a bad omen. A few weeks after I moved in, Karen showed up again, this time with a plate of cookies and a well-practiced smile. She hovered around my front gate as I was repainting it. The metal was old and pitted with rust, but once I'd finished, it looked sturdy enough to stand guard for years. Karen gave me the cookies and leaned in to watch me lock it. "Such a waste to keep this place all to yourself," she said, her eyes fixed on the gate. Her sugary tone made my skin crawl. That's when I realized Karen didn't want to be neighbors. She wanted to be landlord. I brushed it off, telling her I valued my privacy. The flicker of frustration in her gaze told me she wasn't thrilled with that answer. She pasted on her smile and said, "Well, if you need any help improving the place, the HOA has resources. Just something to consider." The whole encounter felt odd. "Excuse me," I called, trying and failing to mask my annoyance. They startled, turning like deer caught in headlights. One of them, a woman in her 40s, started stammering an apology. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Karen told us this was part of the neighborhood and that it was fine to walk here." I froze. Karen? The HOA president from next door? I'd met her only briefly, enough to sense she was pushy, but not enough to imagine she'd send strangers onto my land. Still, there they were, on my private property, claiming she gave them permission. I told them as calmly as I could that they needed to leave immediately. They apologized again, scurrying off. But for me, this was no innocent misunderstanding. It felt like the opening salvo in a battle I hadn't agreed to fight. After they were gone, I took a moment to collect myself. The farm was supposed to be my peaceful escape, a place where I could rebuild a rundown house and enjoy acres of rolling fields with zero drama.